Well, I think to make Canadians come out of their shells and feel a part of their government or their country itself, have pride in it and a sense of identity, the best thing is to have the youth travel, as is being done now by the Centennial Commission. We get a lot of them here. They pay attention, they're keen on what they learn. They teach us some things. We learn a lot of history just guiding here.
I think this is where the Canadian culture, which is starting to develop, is going to come from. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think it's very good.
It may be that many people coming to Ottawa for the first time only see the large buildings, the broad lawns, the carving inside, the stonework, the monumental side of government. This is important because, after all, this is the center and the capital of the country, and this is the place where the laws are made, and this is a representative part of government. And therefore, dignity forms part of it. The different symbols, the different statues, the large buildings, it all forms part of the government complex. But there's much more to it than that. The human side is that this is the place in the center of Canada where the laws are made by the elected representatives from all over Canada, so that every single citizen in this country has a personal interest in this place. During the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a tremendous increase in the activities of Parliament. I think that's rather obvious, but it reflects itself, insofar as I'm concerned as Speaker, in a great increase in the number of tourists visiting Parliament. For example, this year, we will be just under 1 million visitors. Already, we are 20,000 ahead of last year. Well, now, how do we handle these visitors? Well, we decided 2 years ago that it would be in the general interest to recruit a squad of university men and eventually women to act as student guides for the tremendous number of tourists visiting Parliament. This year, for example, we have 30 student guides, and of the 30, 22 universities across Canada are represented. Our object is to try and get one student guide from each university in this country. These are not political appointments. We suggest to the president or the chancellor of the different universities that they send us a name of a young man who would be interested in coming to Ottawa and seizing what I think is a great opportunity of seeing Parliament in action. We have done that. The students themselves are drawn from Vancouver, from Halifax, right across the country, from Ontario, from Quebec. They're French-speaking, they're English-speaking, and we feel that a great opportunity is given to them. For example, they more or less live together. The French are beginning to speak English, and the English are learning French. But more important than that, they are discussing political ideas amongst themselves. Why, even last year, they had settled the flag question inside of 4 weeks, whereas we in Parliament took, I guess, 3.5 months of hard work. In any event, these boys, many of whom, well, for example, one has come from Calgary. He's never been east in his life. Another comes from Vancouver. Another comes from Halifax. Another one comes from Sherbrooke, and so on and so forth. For the first time, they realize that Ottawa, although it's the capital of the country, it's more than that. They are seeing members of Parliament in action. They are meeting cabinet ministers, dining with them sometimes in the cafeteria. They are seeing Parliament in action. And as such, as future leaders in this country, these boys are going back home and they are going to preach the cause that this is a great country, that Ottawa is, while it's the national capital, it's more to it than that. These are the future leaders in this country.
minutes, and it has come out whiter. Most of it is twigs and things like that. It was quarried from what was the bottom of a lake in Tybalt. It's called Tybalt stone. In Tybalt, Manitoba is where it was quarried, and it's all fossilized through the centuries.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And in the archway directly in front of me, on the left, the head of King George V, and on the right of King Edward VIII, who was the only king to abdicate the throne of England, now the Duke of Windsor. We'll now go into the Senate chamber. Just follow me, please.
Translation booth at the rear of the chamber. Everything that's said in the two houses of Parliament is translated into the alternate language as it is being said, so that members or people visiting in the galleries can listen to the translation in either French or English by earphones. Now, the paintings on the walls here are part of a collection that was given to the Canadian government by Lord Beaverbrook. They all show scenes of Canadian troops in action in the First World War. The ceiling is a glass fiber. This was used for acoustic qualities. It is overlaid with gold leaf. Here again, in the recessed portions, you'll see emblems representing the major ethnic groups in the population.
When you came, did you have a set idea of what the job was going to be?
Well, actually, I was quite bored about the prospect of the guide job. I thought it would just be taking tourists around, showing them the different sites, and that would be it. But I've found, you know, and I suppose you have too, Bill, you mentioned earlier, that you really get so you feel the building. You want to impart this on the tourists you were taking around. You want to impart some of the spirit of the building,
right,
as it is.
When I first started, got the job, it just seemed like a job. But coming across Canada, I saw so much of the country that I'd never seen before. And once I got to Ottawa, I was tremendously impressed with what I'd seen so far. And then seeing the House of Commons in action, and they're just ordinary men like my dad or your dad, doing their best for the country, it just built a tremendous pride in me.
What I'd like to do is try to convey this thought to the people, to Canadians especially, who come up here and feel that this building is just a sacred institution, and that there's nothing going on in here, and it's something that's taboo.
They come in and they feel as if it's a big empty building, either awesome or laughable. You get both extremes. It's so seldom you get anyone in the middle who feels that it's for them, it belongs to them as a Canadian. This is what we try to convey to them, that the people wandering about them are their servants. They're human. They can talk to them. They can take part in the government and understand it, which just seems to be out of the picture for Canadians most of the time.
And along both walls are alcoves which extend the length of the hallway right down to the main entrance.
It's really wonderful to see the leaders of our country in action, but it's even more interesting to observe the people that come to these buildings, especially the younger generation, the kids 10, 12, have been the ones that have posed the most interesting questions, in direct contrast to the older generation who seem rather apathetic, to say the least.
I agree. This is one of the hopes, and it gives me a great thrill on the tour. We sort of tend to classify tours as a good or a bad tour. And when we see a bunch of kids who are interested and take pride in the building, for instance, in the library, there's a parchment of the original flag proclamation. A lot of the young children run in and look at this because this is something that they lived through, and this is to them something of Canada in their generation. What do you think, Jamie?
I think it's hard for the guys because some of these young people, they're so bright that they're putting a lot of the guides on the spot, and I think some of us are pretty afraid of these people that when they ask these questions about this. But these I think are the best tours, that when you get young people alive with enthusiasm about Parliament.
The background represents humanity, and in her left hand she holds a symbol of healing. Now, directly behind me is the Parliamentary Library. It was begun in 1860 and was completed in 1876. As I mentioned before, this was the only portion of the building that was saved from the fire of 1916. However, in 1952, a small fire began in the dome in the library, and this set off the automatic water sprinklers. Most of the damage was done by the water.
I think when we came to Ottawa, we each had preconceived ideas about Parliament. What do you think, Keith? You're from British Columbia. You've never been here before.
Well, I think one of the reasons we each had preconceived notions that we were all students, and most of us in political science, and we've studied the men and institutions in this building on this hill as abstract things, and now we see them as real human things. For instance, we were all or a lot of us were in the House of Commons last week when the Minister of Justice resigned, and probably an emotional high point of the whole session. And all of us felt a little bit of blood running out of our face when the announcement was made, because it was a shattering announcement, and these are the sort of things, this sort of excitement we expect in Ottawa. But
I think you're quite right. We all hear about Miss LaMarche and her campaign against cigarette smoking. Well, in the first few days that we were here, there were 30 of us lined in the chairs directly outside her office, and Miss LaMarche was walking past and said, when she saw the first few of us, we looked like a lot of choir boys. And then she saw one guide with a cigarette in her mouth, and immediately she put her finger out and she said, "No, you smoke."
A little something else we might mention, too, on the personal aspects of it. I've noticed that coming here with preconceived ideas about the type of members there are and sort of the mystique about the leadership of parties and politicians, being here for 3 weeks, you sort of lose this. And if you're a student of politics, it's very important. This is another positive aspect. You see the MPs are human people who drive cars, who wear shorts, who carry suitcases all over. They're not, you know, this sort of folk hero that some people think they are. This is a positive thing.
I'm from Sherbrooke, Quebec, which is a fairly small sized city in Quebec. Now, all the kids where I come from are against federalism because they think, well, the English-speaking people don't do much for them, and they're all against them. But I think if they came in Ottawa here, this is my first trip in Ottawa, by the way, out west, if you can call it out west. And I think if they came to Ottawa and saw all the men working for them, all the men dedicated, working 12, 13 hours a day for them, they'd change their minds about many things they think.
I'm one of the bilingual guides among the group. One of the major things I've noticed the difference between the English-Canadian groups and the French-Canadian groups. The French-Canadian groups come up here, they're not, shall we say, the university-educated groups, on the main, that is. They come up here expecting to find, say, a garrison of English Canada, and they're surprised when they find that, you know, that they really do belong, that this is their home as much as any English Canadian's home, that they'll be looked after in French. You know, they won't have to go around on a tour in English.
This high circular chamber is known as Confederation Hall. The center column depicts the Act of Confederation, and the 10 pillars represent the 10 provinces. The groin arches indicate the joining together in confederation and giving and receiving support to each other. And the story behind this is that should any province secede from confederation, this center pillar would crumble, causing a collapse of the Dominion. If my province, which is Quebec, would break away from confederation, this would cause the collapse of the Dominion.
I came to Ottawa hoping, I have been hoping over the last few years very strongly that Canada, as Canada, could continue, could exist. But I'm beginning to feel, and lately quite strongly, that this is going to be fairly difficult for Canada to exist, not only with the cultural differences in Quebec, but the cultural differences in Quebec and the distances in miles, or the distances and the differences in geography compared with the Maritimes and British Columbia. It's perhaps the secession feeling in British Columbia is not from culture so much as just being on the other side of the world. And what's Ottawa? Ottawa's nothing.
We're talking about the differences in the ideas that we had formed, preconceived, that is, before we came here, and then sort of the results of what we've seen here as guides in 2 or 3 weeks. Well, last year I had a lot to do with a resolution in Ontario, mind you, in London, Ontario, to do with the abolition of the Queen, as, of course, the monarchy of Canada. I've noticed since I came here that there is an unusual attraction, really. Say when I'm going through the Senate, I talk about the royal chamber or the vice-regal chamber. There is a real attraction on the part of Americans particularly, this is where I first noticed it, to the sort of mystique surrounding this thing that we have here. They feel as though we have a little bit more, maybe, than their country has in this tradition of the Queen. And this has not sort of changed my idea personally of the monarchy as a constitutional force, but it has leavened my feeling about the use of the monarchy here in Ottawa and, of course, in our federal affairs around Canada.
As myself, too, studying in Quebec, I don't know, with all the bombs and everything that I had since the past year, the people that has visited the Parliament, the French people, I thought it was very surprising to see how interested they were into the Queen and what was the role of the Queen and all about this Parliament, about the Queen running us.
Do you think there's any anything we can draw from this for the future unity of Canada? You know, they talk about the Queen in history as being a unifying force. Do you think there is something in the monarchy to be retained because of the result it has for the unity of the French and English groups in Canada?
Well, of what I've seen so far this summer, I've been here only for 3 weeks, and frankly, I see that the French people are really interested in being united into one big country and be ruled by the Queen, the British way.
And the Queen could help.
That's right. That's how I see it.
Well, I think separatism is, it started in the universities. It's mainly among the more well-educated groups. The workers don't seem to, well, workers in the sense, I mean the people who are not university educated, this hasn't hit them. They haven't been hit by this feeling of separatism. They don't really care about separatism. I don't know, they just want to sort of continue on their path. They don't feel oppressed. Now, you have an intellectual element in Quebec who, they have to be highly respected, an intellectual separatist movement, because they have points. They want more rights for French Canadians. I know myself that there is if I were applying for a job, I think, in a French Canadian war, that I might, a couple of years back, I might have gotten it just because of the fact that I was English. Nothing more. Not that I had any better qualifications, but just because of the fact that I spoke English. But this is changing now.
Well, we've been very pessimistic so far, Colin, on this unity question. Surely we've got some other sides to the question.
Oh, most definitely. I'm perhaps have been quite pessimistic, but I do believe, and I firmly want Canada to succeed, and I believe we will, quite frankly. I do believe we will make something out of it. They're going to be trying years ahead, but we are going to get somewhere in this.
I'm glad to see this, too, because I've noticed in the language situation, when I come here as an English Canadian who can't really speak French properly, there's an immense amount of tolerance from people like Nelson and the others who helped me along, and I'm getting along the way now. And one chap, as a matter of fact, who hadn't spoken a word of English until he came here, kept speaking to me in English until it sort of nurtured me along. I think this is a good sign for our unity.
I myself think Quebec would survive if it, went by itself, but I think Quebec should stay with all the 10 provinces because of what is being done for Quebec, and I think it's a big province in Canada, and I think very much is being done for Quebec.
Being from Ontario, and more specifically southern Ontario, southwestern Ontario, I've just noticed the unique situation of our sitting here. Here's Quebec, sort of on the east of Ontario and way out to BC. I've also heard a lot in this particular part of Canada, in southwestern Ontario, about the secession even of Ontario. We think of ourselves as the prettiest and the richest part of Canada, and we have the great traditions there of Upper Canada. And I've also heard this associated with the province of British Columbia, which sort of by name could be a bit secessionist. What do you think of that, Colin?
Well, secession is perhaps a strong word. We in British Columbia find ourselves in surprisingly the same straits or the same position as many of the people in Quebec. In BC, we feel quite isolated from Ottawa. Ottawa to us is almost the other side of the world, and federalism as such really isn't that strong. Seems to me many people in BC are British Columbians first, and then perhaps Canadians.
Well, what ramifications for our unity is here? Surely I don't really think you hear this in Ontario. I don't think they say they're Ontarians first. They just say it's the best part. And it's sort of the most important.
Well, to an Ontario person, isn't Ontario Canada?
It's the best of Canada. They don't say this is just Canada. I wouldn't say no. It's sort of the richest. All that Canada involves, really, they say, is there at their footsteps. Surely with the type of politics you have in BC, maybe you could say that too. It's rather flashy.
The French Canadian seems to have a sense of history which is almost inborn in him, which the English Canadian seems to lack. The English Canadian seems to feel that, again, the government is a remote thing from him. The French Canadian doesn't come up here expecting to see his member. He's very impressed that his member will see him. It's because of this feeling of involvement in French history, French Canadian history, that they have a sense of it. They've participated in it more, shall we say. Maybe this is why they appreciate being looked after by people who speak their own language, by people who are of their own race and culture, shall we say.
Well, I think that in the States, they have a sense of history that we lack here in Canada. They have legends, they have history, there's history behind just about every institution they have there, whereas we're lacking this in Canada, and I don't think we're interested enough to have it. Canadians just seem to accept things. They don't question things. They don't want to know why things happen. They're just satisfied that it's happening and it's going on, and they don't question and just listen. And I think this is the fault, whereas Americans are more interested in their history. They want to know why things are like they are, and this is the main thing that makes Canadians more empathetic than Americans.
Sometimes you feel as if after the changing of the guard ceremony is over here, the Canadians come in because they heard it was free. It's a tour that's free of the Parliament buildings. The Americans come in more often than not. When they're through the tour, they ask you, what else can I tour around here?
And also on the tours, you find that Americans are very interested in the history of Canada, and they seem more interested in how our Parliament works, and they're interested in why we do certain customs, like have the gentleman usher of the black rod, why we have a mace, and this type of thing, and they're interested in it, and they love tradition. And I don't think Canadians love the tradition or appreciate the tradition in the buildings as much as the Americans do.
I really feel that I've got to impart to the rest of the people, to the Canadians who maybe feel that our problems are overwhelming, and say to them, look here, look what we've got. Our problems can't be this bad. And then to the Americans, and we're pretty good. Look what we have.
Well, did you have any preconceived notions as you came?
No, I don't think I really did. I've read a great deal about it before I came, sort of studied up, as it were.
Well, why did you take the job?
Certainly it wasn't for the job. just summer work type thing, but I've always had a tremendous interest in government and sort of being in the center where things are going on. Why did you come?
Well, I'm interested in politics. I would like to probably make politics my life if things go right for me. And I'm right here getting a first-hand education. You cannot get it anywhere else.
Before coming to Ottawa, I knew I was a Canadian, but I really didn't know what the word meant. But coming up to the Hill and seeing Parliament in action, and meeting tourists, explaining the building and telling them about the building, you sort of get a feeling that you're proud to be a Canadian, and I've come to the point where I now defend Canada above every country. I think it's probably one of the greatest countries in the world.
We have seen one small group of Canadians in action. If we could only generate the same interest amongst people in the rest of Canada, what a country we would have.